2, Promoting CDs, Part 2. This is the MACD Education Committee on February 24th, 2021. And the topic our meeting today is that CDs are an unknown entity, and how do we change that, and how do we get the word out? So this is a 3-part series that 2 parts were conducted last month. At our January meeting, we had the basics of marketing with Lori Parvey-Connors from Meld Marketing. So she just kind of laid out the general rules of marketing, so we can all kind of talk the same way, start thinking the same language. I gave a brief history of Montana CD outreach efforts, and really it was more just to show that we've done a lot of things, and some of them have been successful, but we're still not really getting words out about conservation districts. So what that leads us to now is, let's take a look at what somebody's really doing on the ground. We're going to go out to Washington, and we're going to have Laura Johnson from the Washington State Conservation Commission, and she will present their 5-year outreach effort to promote districts. And one thing I just wanted to find out, we're trying to see, we kind of intended these to be viewed together. So we want to find out how many people have viewed all 3. So if you did not see the last meeting, would you really quickly in the chat box type "did not"? If you're new, type "did not."
I see 2, 3.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay. Well, if it did, just go ahead and type that, and that'll help us a little bit better to determine. So that way we're all kind of on the same page. So as I said, Laura will be our featured speaker today. And where this is all headed is, we do want to get the word out about CDs, but we need to take a different approach to it. So we're talking about developing an outreach strategy to do that. And this is just the preliminary part of that. Later on, there's going to have to be some follow-up. After this meeting, we're going to have to sit down and say, now that we learned all these things about getting the word out about CDs, what are we actually going to do about it? So like I said, the goal today is to develop, to lay the groundwork for working on the strategy, not really to work on it. And where that really gets kind of caught up is people get really excited about a product, usually like making a video or something, and we can't go through all the products. So it's more to kind of set that up so that efforts like videos and other ways we would do outreach will be more effective. So don't get bogged down with details today. If we kind of have to say, hey, we'll deal with that later, don't take it personally, but save those ideas. You can put things in the chat box, and there will be other opportunities for you guys to participate and comment. And so for Laura's presentation, it will be broken down into sections. She asks that you please hold your questions till the end of the section, and then we can use the chat box at any time, or maybe we can open it up for questions at the end of the section. And we'll also have a general comment section at the end. And we're trying to record all this and keep track of it so we don't miss anything. So Laura, would you like to pull up your first slide?
Sure. Okay.
David, you may have to unshare your screen.
Oh, I'm screen sharing. Okay. Let's see. So I clicked on it, said share.
Yeah, if you click on the share, in the center middle, the green button.
Yeah. Okay, I did. Now I have a whole bunch of things up about what I want to share. Oh, wait. Hold. No, Eric, I pressed the red button.
Oh, right. Red button on the, yeah.
Well, I thought this was going to be a really smooth thing, and I boogered it up again, and I apologize.
You're fine.
So anyway, we'll go ahead with it. You can see Laura there on the screen. I will just say she's done, I think, some really good stuff with outreach. Also, she's very passionate about this. She gave a presentation on this on the NACD on a web presentation. It was well received, and we even had some folks in Montana watching that, and they were actually texting and talking during the thing and getting all excited about this. So I'm going to turn it over to a real outreach expert, and Laura, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Dave. And are you guys seeing my presentation now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Well, thank you for inviting me to join you guys today. It's really fun to connect with other folks who are who really care about promoting conservation districts and trying to make sure that we're not a best kept secret anymore, because that drives me crazy. And it's nice to connect with other people who maybe find that crazy making as well. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I think for those who are on the presentation a month ago when Laura Parvey-Connors presented, I had a couple minutes at the end when Dave asked me to introduce myself. And one of the things I said was how tired myself and the districts in Washington were in being called a best kept secret. It seemed like that was the only thing we were known for, and that was within our own internal group. Like we know ourselves as a best kept secret, but how is that helpful? So I've had the pleasure over the last several years of facilitating a group of conservation districts, both their board members and staff, that were really driven to fix that. And you know, we're several years into that effort, and we have some lessons learned. We have some results we're excited about. So I'm happy to share those with you today. And so what I'll be covering, kind of starting with what Dave touched on there a minute ago about making smart communication investments. So why it's so important to really have a plan in place and not just grab onto a shiny communication or marketing object. And then I'll go through some of the whys and hows of Washington's Communications Committee, why we formed, and then also some of the resources we've developed, which we invite other districts and other states to use if they're helpful to you, modify, whatever you want to do. And then we'll talk a bit about some of the results that we've been seeing so far and how we've been tracking that, some of the challenges we have, but some ways that we're able to track some progress that we're making towards the goals that we've set. And then we'd love to hang on and have some discussion with you, answer your questions. I'll have a point about midway through my presentation where I'll open it up for your questions as well. So getting into that smart approach to, oh, go ahead.
Good morning. This is Bob Peterman checking in. Sorry I'm late.
Welcome, Bob. So this is a diagram of that sort of smart approach we've been talking about to communication investment. And that X on the screen is kind of your starting point where you're trying to figure out what to do with communications or marketing. And then there's all these steps. And I think Laura, at your last meeting, and referred to that as process and systems. But it's really this planning or strategy that you come up with to really define what your goals are, how you're going to get there, and then ultimately leading you to what product, what marketing communication tool or product is going to best serve you to meet those goals and objectives you've defined. So there's this whole process in between your starting point and actually deciding what product or tool or approach you're even going to use. But here's what's kind of what happens more commonly, and certainly happened a lot for us in Washington, is we would just forget the planning and process stuff. Let's just, go do something fun. Let's do a video. Let's do social media. Let's do a magazine ad. And there really wasn't we didn't spend enough time thinking about why we were doing that. It just, we saw somebody else do it and it looked fun, or it was trending. So we just would jump from where we were to picking a product. But the problem is, yeah, we would get there quicker. We would produce something much quicker than if we spent time on planning and strategy, process systems. But once we had that product in hand, like what does that mean? Did it do anything? Was it worth the investment of money? What did it actually do? Is it worth doing again? Since if we hadn't defined what we were trying to accomplish in the first place, we couldn't evaluate whether all the effort or time or money that we put into that product even yielded anything that was helpful for us. And that's a problem. It's a problem for conservation districts because we don't have money to be throwing around. There's some people where it's like, yeah, they can just, their budget's enormous. They can just pick a product, do it, and if it doesn't work, doesn't matter. But we don't have that luxury. When we make investments in anything, whether it's a conservation program or a marketing and communication strategy, we need to know that it has a good chance of working because we don't have a big enough budget or enough people to just pick something. We really want to know that it's the best option for what we are wanting to do. It has the highest probability of actually helping us get where we want to go. So with, Laura at your first meeting went through some, I'm getting a bit of an echo. I don't know if anybody else is. I think it's gone now. Okay. Laura had gone through some more details about what a marketing or outreach plan looks like, some of the pieces of that. And so I'm not going to reiterate all of that again, but what I will do is share just some 3 basic questions that kind of encapsulate all those steps. And I don't know, it might be worth, I'm getting a little echo, so I think if folks could mute their lines, I think that might help. So those 3 questions that we've used are really basic, but have really helped us make sure we're taking a more process systems-based approach to our communication and marketing. The first one's really simple. What's the problem? What is the problem that we are really wanting to address and making sure that's pretty specific? The second question is, what can we leverage to fix it? Because again, we don't have a bunch of money, so maybe that's a piece of it, but what other talents, time, partners, what do we have? What can we leverage that we already have and can make use of to help fix our communication and marketing problem that we've defined? And then how will we know it worked? And that's where you get into some of those measurements to gauge, if you're actually achieving where you want to go. And so what I'll do with the rest of this presentation is sort of show how we applied those 3 questions to the work of the Washington Communications Group so far. So starting with question 1, what's the problem? And I let you guys know that straight from the beginning of this presentation. We just did not want to be a best kept secret anymore. We've been around for over 80 years, I think now, and it's kind of ridiculous that that's still something that we say about ourselves. And especially when you think about, and I think Dave touched on this in your January meeting, it's not like we haven't been trying. We've been doing a lot. We've been tabling at events. We've been launching websites, getting more on social media. We've been doing a lot. So why is it not working better for us? Why are we still a best kept secret? That was our problem. And we also identified 3 other hurdles we felt like were really underneath that bigger problem, one of which was around capacity. So, just acknowledging that as conservation districts and just in our conservation community, we don't have a lot of money and people and resources. So that's a hurdle. Coordination can be a hurdle. When we have in Washington, we have 45 conservation districts. I think in Montana, you guys have over 50. So how do we coordinate any kind of communication or marketing effort in a way that's going to be effective? And then a cohesion piece. So it's across all those districts, there's a lot of different communities that we work with. There's different ways we talk about our work to make it effective. Some of those districts have defined local branding. Some of them don't have any. So how do we come up with a way of talking about ourselves and presenting ourselves in a way that doesn't threaten local branding and in a way that we talk about districts there, but also does create space for us to elevate who we are at a state level and a little more broadly. So that was our problem. And then we got into what we could leverage to fix it. Well, we found that some of the things that were challenging were also things we could leverage. We have those 45 districts, but across those districts, some of them have staff that can range, we've got some districts that have one person, we have some that have over 20. All of those conservation districts have 5 board members. Some of them have additional associate board members. And so that's actually quite a team of people. It's kind of a conservation army. So we didn't want to take that for granted. These were all people who were really passionate about conservation, and yes, they are already overworked. Yes, they're already volunteering their hours, but we just felt like if we put a call out and had a really clear mission of what we wanted to do, there'd be people among our community that'd be willing to make the time to work together towards a more coordinated, capacity building, cohesive communication effort. So we looked into that more. We found our skill sets combined were pretty cool. We had folks that were really interested that had more background in websites, some in photography, some in graphic design, some in media relations. So we really, by forming a group, felt we could maximize our skill set. We've got things now, just the fact that right now we're meeting on Zoom. We've been meeting, that allows us to meet. We don't have to pay for people to travel to be in one spot. We can meet regularly through the technology that's available now, connect regularly, share resources using some of these technology tools in a way that we haven't been able to before. Again, as I mentioned before, just knowing that people are passionate and listening for people who are really passionate about this topic helped us kind of think about and invite people who might be interested and make time to be part of this effort. I think there was a broad recognition with conservation districts in Washington, and I feel like I've heard it elsewhere too, in basically every state I've had the pleasure of working with, that there's a real willingness to share. If somebody's finding a communication or marketing tool that's working well for them, they want others to succeed. They know that the more conservation districts are able to get their story out there, they know we have such great stories to tell, it's going to be contagious. They want to share resources that are working well with others. And that willingness to share, we felt like it was something we could leverage as well. I think it's helpful having the position that I'm in at the Conservation Commission. That builds a little capacity. And I know Eric is now providing some capacity for Montana, and that's fantastic. And then we also recognized that, hey, again, coming back to our strength in numbers, if we had some unified messaging or unified branding or something like that, with all of us speaking the same language about districts, that could really make an impact. And then we also recognized how many of us shared those common goals around, it wasn't hard for us to decide what our problem statement was. Everybody was tired of being a best kept secret and recognized those more specific challenges around capacity, coordination, and cohesion. And so with all that in mind, we kind of formed around creating this, what we call the Communications Partnership and Outreach Group, which sounds like it's very similar to what we're doing right now. We just wanted to create a group where we could talk about our challenges and come up with a plan for how we would overcome them and build capacity for districts to market themselves and tell their story in an easier way, in a more consistent way as well. So for our group, we really wanted our members to be representative of the conservation districts across Washington. And that meant making sure we had both staff and board members, we call them supervisors in Washington. And just geographically, you know, we have everything from the Puget Sound and rainforests to shrub steppe desert areas. And so we wanted to make sure the geographic range was covered by the members in our group. We also wanted to make sure that conservation districts of different capacity levels were represented. So not just the ones that have several staff on board, but also the ones that only had a couple. So that if we did go down the road of creating resources and tools, that they were going to be serving that spectrum of district capacity levels and the different landowners that they work with. We had a representative from our Association of Conservation Districts to make sure we had that connection there. And then my position at the Conservation Commission facilitates the group, and we also have some admin support from our agency to keep like just take notes and things like that. So our meeting process, nothing that spectacular here, pretty run of the mill. We would meet monthly. We've been meeting monthly, I think we're coming up on 10 years actually. We've had monthly web meetings. I only had 1 or 2 actual in-person meetings that were more formal. We'll tend to get together, like if there's a conference or something where a lot of us are there, we'll have lunch together, but it's been mainly web meetings. We've been able to accomplish a lot that way. The districts in that group will set our priorities and our plan, systems, process, is the way Laura talked about that. They're really the ones that come up with and drive what we're going to be working on. And then we'll form subcommittees outside of our regular meeting work to actually complete some projects that we've identified that we want to do. So again, continuing with what we can leverage to fix it, the first piece of leveraging was creating this group that provided, you know, some of that capacity and coordination piece that was missing before. But we still had a capacity issue in terms of giving districts, individual districts across the state, the capacity to market themselves. And then we still had this cohesion issue of how do we present ourselves in a more unified way. And so we decided that we could leverage, the way we could leverage what we already have going to fix that is by creating a marketing toolkit that's hosted on the Conservation Commission's website that would be a platform for us to create and share resources.
Laura, I can't hear you anymore. I think we can hear you now.
You're on mute now. We still can't hear you. This is Rebecca. If you click next to your mute button, there's an arrow, and you can go down, and on that menu, you can switch to phone audio if your computer audio isn't working. It'll give you a number to dial in.
I think I'm back. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. I got booted somehow. I'm not sure. All right. Well, picking up where I was. So anyway, I've got on the screen the sort of foundation of what that toolkit, we set out that toolkit to be. And at the very basic level of that, we wanted to make sure we had a branding platform or just a foundation for how we were going to talk about and present our work. So that would include coming up with some key messages for talking about conservation districts, some branding and imagery, color palette, logo for presenting the conservation districts of Washington State as a network of service providers as a whole, and just anything we could do to more unify our promotions about districts across the state. The second level building on top of that would be some resource building. So based on what conservation districts were identifying as priorities for their marketing needs, we would create some templates and trainings and resources designed to assist with that. And then the third level was just going to be some resource sharing, and that wouldn't necessarily have to be as priority driven, but just, we don't want to lose track of, if somebody has a tool that they've created and it's working well, we could add that to the toolkit just to share in addition to the other more planned out resources in there. So at this point, I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to start going into all the different resources we have in our marketing toolkit in a minute. But before I do that, I just want to pause and just hear if anybody has any questions just about the communications group we have in general, or our process for forming, or how we decided to build a toolkit, anything about what I've covered so far.
This is Jeff Ryan, Lewis and Clark CD. Laura, maybe it's been mentioned before, but what is your Washington State Conservation Commission? What is that?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I should have shared that in the beginning. So in Washington State, we have an independent small state agency that helps fund, coordinate, and promote all the conservation districts in Washington. So in a lot of other states, and I'm not sure if this is true for Montana, it's that role has become a division of a larger agency, either Department of Natural Resources or Department of Ag. But in Washington, we are just an independent agency that provides that role. So we administer state funds to conservation districts. We help them with some of their kind of operational support. And then we also promote their services and programs at a state level.
Jeff, this is Dave. They're our version of the Conservation Districts Bureau.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Great. Just wondered.
Yeah, good question. Anything else before I continue?
Laura, this is Jeff Ryan again. Sorry to hog your time, but what
No,
I was
go
just
for it.
curious, maybe you'll get into this, but to what degree does your local state Fish, Wildlife, and Parks work with you folks? I would assume they're a player in some ways, maybe not.
Yeah. So let's see, Fish and Wildlife. So we have the Department of Fish and Wildlife in our state. They are an associate member of our Conservation Commission. So our agency, we have about 21 people on our staff, but our agency is governed by a 10-member board of commissioners. Some of them are agency some of them are agency members, some of them are appointed by the governor, some of them are elected by conservation districts of those 10. But then we also have associate members, so they're non-voting members, but they still attend all the meetings and help advise some of the policies and work of the commission. And so Department of Fish and Wildlife is on that. They are a non-voting commission member. So we do we connect with them in that way. For parks, we honestly haven't had as much partnership with them. And the other agencies that we do connect with more regularly and are on our commission would be our Department of Ecology. That's the more regulatory environmental agency in Washington, Department of Natural Resources, and Department of Agriculture.
Thank you.
Any other questions so far?
There's a question in the chat about what CPO stands for. And I think Brandy, came in a little bit later.
Yeah, sorry. Is Communications Partnership and Outreach Group. And I used to make jokes about calling it the C, like wanting to add a 3 in there so I could call it the C3PO group because I'm a Star Wars nerd. And then I was told not to do that anymore because it's kind of lame. But yeah, it's Communication, Partnership, and Outreach. Any other questions? All right. So we left off here, kind of looking at our plan for what we wanted to have in that marketing toolkit. And before I get into it, I want to let everybody know, if you didn't hear this, I did present during the NACD annual conference on this and extended an invitation for people to plagiarize anything in our marketing toolkit that's helpful for you. Some things in there are going to be Washington specific or mention a little bit about Washington. Feel free to modify that to fit Montana if it's helpful for you. Most of the things in there we feel like are general enough that they might be helpful for other states, and we have absolutely no issue with others using them or modifying them, making it better. So just putting that out there. So I've got the web address at the top of the screen for our marketing toolkit. Again, this is hosted on the Conservation Commission's website. I just took screenshots, and I can, at the end of my presentation, if you guys want me to actually go to the live site and show you, kind of dig around in there, we can do that. I just wanted to show some highlights for now. So the toolkit is organized under 5 different tabs, and I'll just go through a few highlights under each of those tabs right now to show you what we've built in there so far. It's a living toolkit. We're adding things every year to it. So this is kind of more foundational level under the branding that I talked about in that little diagram of the triangle. So this is where we put in our real branding and messaging about conservation districts. So we have a color palette that we use at the commission. A lot of the districts have started using this too, just to provide a little more, like when they see something that looks this way, they know it's part of our conservation family. That also included creating a logo and kind of tagline for conservation districts of Washington State. Some of them, not every district in Washington uses the conservation C. Some of them, quite honestly, don't like it. And so they've done their own branding or wanted to do their own logo, and that's fine. But when we would do a report to the legislature, for example, about what conservation districts had accomplished, we didn't have room for 45 different logos on it, and that would be confusing. We wanted to have something to let everyone know that conservation districts were a network of service providers across Washington, that we are a force. So came up with a logo to represent all conservation districts in Washington as well. Under the media and events tab, we wanted to make sure these are really basic resources in here, just things, if you're doing a media release, what to think about before writing the release, some tips for writing it, submitting the release, a media release template. We have templates for event planning, what to do 6 weeks out, 4 weeks out, 3 weeks out. Since so many districts put on tours and events, we felt like that was something that was a real simple tool we could put out there that would be helpful for the majority of districts. Under the messaging tab area, that's where you'll find the elevator pitch. And that's what I was mainly presenting about at the NACD conference a week or 2 ago. This is one of our more recent resources that we created. We wanted to make sure that we had a very short statement in our back pocket for the next time somebody asks us what a conservation district is and what we do. There's so much, it's very easy to go down a lot of rabbit holes when somebody asks you that question, and we wanted to at least have some uniform messaging that really separates us from the pack. And at the same time, we wanted to make sure that that could be tailored to a conservation district's local community. There's no language we could come up with that would work everywhere in Washington. We have some very, very different communities. So we set it up somewhat like a Mad Lib. So you'll see on the screen, we've got different words within our elevator pitch that are underlined, say what, why, who, how. And underneath that is a set of columns that correspond to those titles. So what our elevator pitch is conservation districts of Washington State partner with private landowners who own over 50% of land to voluntarily take action to keep our air, water, and soil healthy. They're community-based hubs of natural resource expertise and funding, led and staffed by locals who understand the needs of landscapes and fellow community members that they serve. But for example, if your district didn't really like saying that you just partner with private landowners, maybe you prefer something like you facilitate or empower. And we know I've had a lot of districts that really like to empower private landowners. So what you could do is, since this word is underlined, go down into the corresponding what column, and like, oh, we could say empower, we could say enable, we could say invite, we could say promote. You could say something completely different that's not in that list, but just really inviting districts to make it their own while still trying to provide some consistency in how we talk about conservation districts. And I didn't know how many of you were able to see that presentation, so I don't want to spend too much time on the elevator pitch. So again, when I'm done here, if you want me to come back to this, we can spend more time on the elevator pitch, but that is in the messaging section of our toolkit. Also in that messaging section, we've got some talking points about voluntary conservation programs. We occasionally will have meetings with either partner agencies or elected officials, some of whom are a little hesitant about the voluntary approach to conservation and perhaps don't think it works. So we wanted to come up with some general talking points about why we believe in it. And so we have those talking points in our messaging section. We also have a worksheet for capturing effective testimonials from landowners and partners. And this is something that we've used in a lot of different ways, from everything from grant applications, state budget requests, reporting to the legislature about the value of the investments they've made in conservation districts to actually get constituents to share the value that they've received from conservation district services. And this really talks through a plan or strategy for how you would come up with the best message and best spokesperson for a testimonial. And what I have found to be one of the more helpful pieces of this worksheet is we have a list of 10 questions to help draw out the story without scripting or providing too much coaching to the person who's providing the testimonial. You don't want them to feel like it's unnatural. You want them to say the testimonial in their own words. But at the same time, it can be helpful for you and for them to provide some prompts of some points you'd like them to address. And so we came up with a list of 10 questions. And I wouldn't suggest using all 10. I'd suggest pulling 2 or 3, and so that the testimonial doesn't get too long, and just asking them to answer these questions in their testimonial. And we found that it was really helpful at driving a strong testimonial out. So I think that's on page 2 or 3 of that worksheet that's in there. So under the outreach tab, we have things like tips to engage elected officials and decision makers. So that covers everything about why it's important to establish relationships with your elected officials and decision makers. Some tips on how to engage them, everything from trying to meet them for coffee or inviting them to tours and subscribing to their newsletter and inviting them to subscribe to yours, asking them to do a guest editorial for your newsletter, and then some questions that you may want to ask when you do get a chance to meet with them. You know, learning about what they want to accomplish in their next few years, and then being able to speak to how you think your conservation district can help them achieve that. Or straight out just asking, like, how would they like to see the conservation district help them? Another thing we have in here is related to technical assistance. So I'm not sure about in Montana, but this is something we really struggle with. It's like such a catch-all phrase that a lot of people outside of our world at least, don't understand. And trying to write it all out hasn't been working for us. So we, just based on knowing our audience was going to be mainly decision makers and legislators who have very limited time, we decided the best way to present that would be in a visual. So we created this visual of steps of all the different things, and this isn't even all of it, but a lot of common things that technical assistance funding covers, all the way from just building that relationship to actually getting to a point where you're applying for funding. All that has to happen before you even break ground on a conservation project, and that's what TA, technical assistance, covers. And we already have found that this has been an enormous help. And actually, we're told this year, had it not been for the pandemic, we may have actually seen an increase in technical assistance dollars this year for conservation districts, because they're getting such a better understanding of what it was, not just from this piece, but I think it was a really good jumping off point for people to gain that understanding. The other thing is we have a very quick list of 10 ways conservation districts can help you. Again, we don't want to get into too much detail on everything here, but we just wanted to have a visual little teaser for folks who maybe aren't familiar with conservation districts. Districts have used this at tabling events, just to hope that, you know, of this 10 things that are listed with little icons, hopefully make it a little more inviting, that whoever they're speaking to can at least recognize themselves in one of these 10 examples of services offered and get excited about learning more. The fifth tab here, photos and graphics. That links to our photo library that we've been building through a series of photo contests with conservation districts over, I think we did our 7th or 8th annual photo contest last year. And you'll see we have almost 1,200 photos. Well, yeah, almost 1,200 photos in here now. And these are all free for conservation districts to use. They are all taken by conservation districts in Washington or by staff at our agency or at the association. They're organized under different gallery titles to help and tagged also, so it's easy for folks to find what they're looking for. And these are all free. They're beautiful photos that districts can use on their websites, on their marketing materials. I used them when we redid the Conservation Commission's website last year and saved a lot of money, because normally you have to go kind of outsource and get the rights to use some photos, and we didn't have to do that. We have this incredible gallery of photos for districts to use. This is our latest resource. This is a visual equivalent for conservation measures. And again, this was more designed for a legislative decision maker audience, because we were just finding that the way we were talking about our work, numbers of BMPs, length of stream restored, it just didn't really have any context for a non-conservation audience. So they don't really know what it means when you say you're saving 1.02 cubic feet of water per second. I don't know, like, what does that mean? Is that a good thing? Is that a lot? I don't know. But if you say that that's enough to fill an Olympic-sized pool every day, they're like, oh, that's that. I can see that that's a lot. So what this resource does is, on the left-hand column, you'll see just the basic measure equivalent. On the right, or a basic measure. On the right-hand side, you'll see an example of a visual equivalent, something like the volume of the bathtub, an Olympic swimming pool, average dump truck volume, American football field. And then we also have more Washington-specific geographic references, which you could also do in Montana, things like the height of Mount Rainier, length of certain bridges that everybody's familiar with because they have to commute across them. And you could do this depending on, you know, who you're talking to. If we were talking to somebody in the Seattle area, we might want to reference a specific sports field as our acreage or something like that, so that we know that they have an equivalent in their mind. So anyway, we created this, and all these that are green links on the screen, when a district clicks on those, it takes them to a little icon or vector graphic of that visual equivalent that they can use for free in their materials. So that's sort of the initial tour of our marketing toolkit, and kind of concludes how we decided to leverage the CPO group and the toolkit to try to solve, or at least work towards solving our problem of being a best kept secret, and those little barriers that we had identified that were preventing us from getting there around capacity, cohesion, and coordination. So at this point, you know, we've been at this for several years, and it becomes very important that we start to see like how we're knowing that this works, because we have several people showing up monthly for years now to devote their time. I'm spending a lot of my job on this, which means the commission is investing some of my time in this. So it's really important that we know that this is working. We're actually achieving some of the goals and sub-goals that we've set. So we'll start with the most basic things that we have been looking at to see how this is working. So at the most basic level, we're like, okay, well, is it working for the members of the group? Are we recruiting and retaining members of our communications partnership and outreach group? And we're finding that, like I said, I think we're about 10 years in, and around 50% of our members are still the original and founding members, which, if you think about how much turnover there is in supervisors and staff just at the local level, is pretty amazing. And then the other part of that is that we're consistently adding new members by request. So I'm not having to go out to districts and say like, hey, can you please find somebody from your district to join this group? We talk about our work, we try to share what's going on, and we often just get requests from board members and from staff who are interested in joining us. So we feel like that's a really good success. Another basic level, do we have support from leadership? Because if we don't have support from the leadership of our conservation family, then it's going to be hard for us to do what we're wanting to do. So support for our group is consistently included in the Conservation Commission, our agency's annual and long-range plan. So that board of commissioners I mentioned are consistently putting support for this group as something that they insist on being done. So that's great. And then we're also seeing that our agency, our Association of Conservation Districts, and individual districts themselves are calling upon our communications group for marketing related issues. They're wanting to coordinate with us. They're knowing that when something related to marketing comes up, it should come to our group. So that's a good sign too. So at a little higher level, how we're knowing this worked, we want to see like what we're putting all this planning and investment and effort and time in. What products are products that we're putting out resulting in anything that's coming out on the other side of this conveyor belt? So kind of working up to some more mid-level things that we're tracking, I'll say. About 85, we did a survey, and I think it's even higher now. Survey was done a couple of years ago, but around 85% of districts at that time were using marketing toolkit resources, which we feel like is a success. They're finding them useful. And that marketing toolkit page is consistently among the most visited pages on the Commission's website. We have 70 pages. And I think for about the last year, it's averaged around like the 12th most visited page of those 70. And we're seeing it used. So as an example, I've got the color palette on the left-hand side of your screen. and you can see I've got, I think, 4 different districts pulled up here. Grays Harbor Conservation District was one of ours that didn't have a logo at all. And I think Pacific below it as well. So they're just using the logo that we created in the toolkit as their logo, putting their name alongside it. And that's great for them. They didn't have one. They don't have communications people to create a logo for them. So they're just using it. That's great. We had Palouse Conservation District and Clark Conservation District, who since we launched our toolkit had decided to rebrand themselves and create logos for the local level. And while they didn't use this one, and they don't, by all means don't have to, they used the color palette to create their own logos that look well and at least still reflect that identity, while still being very locally specific to their district. And these are really different districts. This one's in Southwest Washington and kind of like the Palouse, wheat and grain country. Clark is in one of the more urban areas of the western side of Washington. So it's working for really different urban and rural areas, just to use the colors and present ourselves in a more unified way. At the state level, we're doing the same. So we're using that color palette to really consistently present work. This is a fact sheet on the left is about a program that conservation districts deliver and is administered at the state by the Conservation Commission. And on the right is our 2019 annual report. So we're just, the colors itself are just presenting ourselves in this very unified way. We're making use of those icons and graphics for telling our story more effectively in photos. And then taking that a bit further, using that annual report as an example. So we published it online and have been tracking engagements with it. And so when we rolled it out and can track the engagements we were having with people clicking on it, seeing how long they spent looking through it. And we waited a little bit before we sent direct emails to our legislators, because we wanted to see, that's our primary audience really for this report. And we wanted to see if we saw an uptick in engagement and how long they spent reading it after we sent direct emails inviting them, announcing our report and inviting them to take a look. We got a 25% increase in views after we sent those direct emails to legislators in Washington, and their average view time was over 8 minutes. We felt like that was really good. We were really pleased with that. They weren't just clicking on it like, that's nice, and then moving away. We felt like that meant we're presenting our story in a way that engaged them. Some other metrics that we're looking at, we look at social media. So if for example, in our 2020 photo contest that we did with conservation districts to help boost our photo gallery, we also, for a more public-facing part of that contest, even though that was focused on just entries from district employees and board members, the winners were like, let's just present these on social media, make sure folks can see these beautiful photos of conservation district work. We've been doing a photo of the week featuring entries from that contest. And since we did that, and that was just, I think, mid-December, it's only been a few months. Since we started featuring more of those photos from the contest, and we've seen a 10% increase in likes on our Facebook page and a 26% increase in followers on our social media. Then we get into some more, I would say, squishier metrics about how we're knowing this works. And I say squishier because getting back to the very beginning, not having the money to do like a giant survey of the state is like they're gauging people's awareness of districts before we started this work and after. We just don't have that. And there's so many variables. It's really challenging, even if you do have the money, to get some good metrics. So, but there are some things that we're just noticing, and we can't say is certainly not all of our work that's leading to it, but we feel like it's a contributing factor. Our state budget for conservation districts, even despite the pandemic, our capital funding actually this year was really good. It was one of the more promising, at least in the governor's budget. It's not approved yet, but the governor's proposed budget for our agency and districts this year is one of the better ones we've seen in a long time. And we are consistently hearing legislators during hearings talk favorably about districts. In one-on-one meetings with legislators, they're talking about how much they love districts, and they seem to already be aware of what districts are doing before our staff or the association staff bring it up. We're being included in more new policies and programs. Either, our partners are asking for districts to be a part of delivering programs like a new soil health initiative and sustainable farms and fields program in Washington. Our agency and districts were really invited to be part of these larger programs and thought of to be the deliverers of programs that in the past we weren't as much. There's also more scrutiny, and I think that's something to be aware of and plan for. If the more you are in the spotlight and the more people know about you, the more scrutiny there's going to be of your work. So for us, that's meant our district board members are not on the general ballot in Washington. It's a long story. Without getting into that whole story of it, there's not that many people who participate in conservation district elections. They're off-ballot elections run locally. And we've been getting a lot more scrutiny about that. And while that part is challenging and we're trying to work on a better system for the voting, it tells us that more people are aware of districts. And I think that's just something to be expected. The more they know about you and the more they give you to do, the more scrutiny there's going to be about how you do your work. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying that that's something to be expected. I think if your marketing actually is working. And the last part of that is we're seeing more districts. I have alerts every day of when conservation districts are in the media. I get automatic alerts directing me to those stories, and there's been an increase. And I haven't done a good calculation of what that increase has been, but it's notable. So I'm just going to go over a few, the last 3 real lessons learned we've gotten from this whole effort, and then just open it up to discussion here. So I'd say that first one is just how important it is to identify what our challenges are, and then because we don't have a huge budget, really leverage. We do have more assets, I think, than we realize. And once we started looking at all the assets we have and our supervisors and the expertise that we could bring together, it helped us realize that capacity wasn't going to keep us from achieving what we wanted. The second thing was a real consistent commitment to plan and process. So we weren't just, grabbing at shiny objects anymore and having people go this way and that. Once we had kind of come together around what our process was going to be, I made sure that was a consistent thing that we talked about at our monthly meetings. It just really streamlined our work. And one piece of that that I didn't mention before is we have split into 2 different groups. We have a communications and marketing focus group, which is this communications partnership and outreach group I've been talking about. Separate from that is a K-12 educators group. And that education group has its own consistent plan and process in place. We just found while we do have capacity to achieve these things, it was too much to do together. So I think that was one thing that we really felt like helped us with our consistency and really defining our plan.
Can I
break those into 2.
To see better and
then the last of the 3 lessons learned was we keep our group fairly manageable. We've got 12 to 15 participants, I'd say, a month. When we get a lot more than that, it can be a little difficult to move larger projects forward. Sometimes you have people coming in and out and having to be caught up in where you are in the process, but making sure that the members that are consistently there and part of our work are representative of those geographic regions, of those capacity levels that districts have, so that we're serving everyone best in a manageable way. I've got my contact information up on the screen, the link to the marketing toolkit on the screen, and I'm just gonna open it up for anybody's comments and questions.
Laura, Jeff Ryan again, Lewis and Clark. Real quick question. You mentioned assets. And you mentioned you have access to skilled staff and supervisors. How in the heck did you know what their capabilities were? How do you find that out? How did you folks find that out? I don't think here in Montana we know as a group all our talents.
Sure. It started, this group formed before I was at the commission, but from what I've learned is this was done at, I don't know if you guys have like all district association meetings or things like that, but this was an all district, it was a budget planning meeting that brought all the districts together, and they just really realized that this was something they all wanted to do. And so at that meeting, there was a larger conversation about wanting to form a communications committee that ended with, a piece of, I think it was like a sticky little chart up on the wall where people came and signed their names up as being interested to serve on the committee. And that was how it started. Since then, what we've done is just send out really regular communication to districts about this effort existing. I'll mention it at presentations that I give to conservation districts. When we have an employees conference, if I present there anything about this work, I always mention this group. I always mention this group at association meetings so that everybody's aware that it exists. And we've built our membership, I think, over time because we just keep mentioning it. And then we bring on more people that know about us. As we get supervisors that come on that have a marketing background or interest, or staff that come on that have that interest or experience, I think they're just kind of drawn to it because they've learned about it through our constant saturation that this group exists.
Laura, this is Dave. I've got a question for you. Quite often we talk
Yeah.
about audiences, and I'm not so sure we always target into it, or we try to market to audiences. And the example I would use, if you went out to Eastern Montana, say on the border of North Dakota, you'd find those are largely agricultural and ranching communities. If you go to our northwest corner, you'd see that it's a lot of forestry, a lot of federal land, river corridors, that kind of thing. And then in between, in particular in the western part of the state, we have more urban audiences. And so I think about Washington because, you have the coast and Spokane, highly urbanized, but you've got a lot of those kind of farm things in between. So is there a way that you have, if you come across that, about how you market this to such a broad audience?
Yeah, and I think that's where having representation from those different regions on our communications group has been so important. I think there have been resources that we've developed, including the elevator pitch and some of our messaging, where we might start writing it in some way, and then somebody from the east side will be like, yeah, that word's never going to fly. Or you're going to drive away a lot of my community if you say just that one word. So I think that on our communications group, it's been really helpful just to have that as a filter for, the state level messaging, making sure we're not using any words that are going to put people off. And then also, that's why we set that elevator pitch up like a Mad Lib and word bank, because we knew there's only so much we can do at the state level because we can't speak everybody's language. And so we want to encourage districts to translate whatever we put out in a way that's going to work best at the local level. We did, I think in the very beginning, we started doing some landowner profiles, and this might be something we get back to again. And so we kind of had these profiles of, and they're very generalized. It's not going to be, it can't be perfect, but we have very generalized profiles of, cranberry growers in Washington and small forest landowners in Washington and wheat growers in Washington, and we filled out things like the type of things they tend to care about, the type of issues they tend, and this was filled out by folks that either worked in those areas or board members who represented those actual producers or growers. And they just kind of filled out the things they cared about, things they were concerned about, some of the barriers they might see to participating with conservation districts, and kind of using those profiles that would help us frame messages. But I think that's, you know, probably best done at the local level. But we did sort of start down that road of at least trying to identify how values, barriers, concerns can differ from one area or one grower or one type of landowner to another.
So what I maybe hear you saying is, because a lot of times when people go to address this, they say, oh, we have to talk to the quote general public, unquote. And it's like we have this big message.
No.
No, and so what you're saying is we kind of have a background theme where we talk about how we do business, voluntary, we're your neighbors. And then it's got to be to each, in some cases in our state, probably the local districts in particular, but also maybe areas, then they need to take that one more step. So they're really talking directly to and the audience has to know they're being talked to.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So you're using the elevator pitch as an example again. You know, you might start, say you're talking to a shellfish grower in Washington. You know, you might start by giving just a general sense of, you know, conservation districts, you know, being voluntary and these community-based hubs that are here to, you know, provide, that are, you know, run by your neighbors, you know, folks that are within your community, and that they are, you know, providing financial help and expertise. You might start with something around that very briefly, but quickly after that, jumping into, you know, what you know are a shellfish grower's priority. In Washington, a lot of that's going to be around water quality. A lot of, and also one thing we've learned is our shellfish growers really care about education. So they want to be part of the outdoor classroom experience. They want folks to learn about how shellfish is part of Washington's culture. So we have some of our districts do education work and go into classrooms and provide lessons every once in a while. So you might, you know, after you give a real general overview of districts, jump quickly into water quality specific work, or, you know, how they translate local agriculture and things like shellfish industry into lessons so that future generations can learn about how important that is for Washington's culture. So I think that's where the districts have the expertise at the local level of knowing how to pivot from that broader unified messaging down to what's going to be most important for the specific person they're speaking to.
This is Bradley Watkins from the Missoula Conservation District. Thanks for your presentation. It was great. When you were going over your success tools or metrics for measuring your success, it seemed like maybe that was the success of the program at the statewide level. Is that correct? And so do you have examples of, or was there a way to measure how individual districts found success by using the tools? Could you give us some examples of that, please?
Sure. So I would say more recently, let me see if I can go back to, I'm going to see if I can go back to a slide that has a district that's had some success here. Okay. So you'll see Palouse newsletter here, and they've got these icons and accomplishments on the side of it. So Palouse started using more icons and visuals to describe their work. They also started using those conservation equivalents. So like translating how many acres of land they, through one of their programs, they had helped landowners convert from conventional tillage to conservation tillage. And talking about, and so they were translating that into like the size of the city of Seattle, instead of just saying the number of acres, they started talking about that the amount of soil that they had saved on farms rather than having it wash away into erosion was enough to fill dump trucks lined from Olympia Capitol to the city, the Seattle Space Needle. When they started speaking about their work in those ways and using some of the tools that they found in the marketing toolkit, and again, this was directed for a legislative and decision maker audience, the program that they're using, which is a regional conservation partnership program, they needed to get state match for that. Their ability to secure match and to continue that, to get an extension of that program as well at the federal level, I mean, it was pretty easy. They've done an excellent job. We've heard legislators repeat some of those stories they've told. So, you know, if they had said how many thousand tons of soil, no legislator is going to remember that as a talking point. We have heard them talk. We've had a legislator repeat, and actually multiple people repeat their talking point about it being enough to fill dump trucks lined back to back from the Olympia Capitol, Seattle. Like, they're giving these talking points to legislators to support funding for their work. So I would say that's been one really good example. Some of the other, you know, like with Clark above this newsletter, since they just really recently rebranded their district, I know one of their goals, they never really had defined branding, and they're hoping to introduce themselves to a more urban audience, since that's a huge part of their community. We're still too early to know how that's going. They have been in the news more. They have had more people coming to their plant sales. They've had more people turning up at their elections. So, I mean, they're seeing an increase in engagement, but it's a little hard to tie that, you know, to their goal of, I just don't think it's been long enough to really be able to tell if they're achieving that. There's signs that it's heading that way, though. So I would say we're seeing, I think we're long enough into this now, and districts have been using the tools long enough now that we are seeing signs of it being helpful, and that districts are actually, it could be contributing to some success in securing funding for some of their work too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion about any of this?
Let me,
I got one for you, Laura.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks for the presentation. That was great. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a bit about your kind of strategy and methodology for setting conservation district messaging and imagery and colors, and like that real kind of foundation that you were kind of talking about. Because I would imagine that without like a broad consensus on like that foundation, it would be difficult to get to maintain commitment to like this communications plan and these resources that you've built up. And so I guess, like, do you have advice for kind of building that top level messaging and brand so that it complements individual CD, like local messaging? I guess, yeah. Do you have any strategies to help build that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, so there's two things I'll say. The first is about like why we started there, and the second will be about how we tried to gain support for that and like make sure that that was carried forward across at least the majority of districts. So the reason why we started there is we, you know, tying back to our best kept secret issue, we were finding that a lot of our partners and some legislators weren't realized, like they knew their conservation district maybe, but they didn't realize that their conservation district was one of 45. So they just thought it was just, you know, it's just, you know, Cascadia Conservation District. It's just this NGO that exists on its own. They didn't realize that it was not only one of 45, but one of, you know, about 3,000 across the nation. There was just no they didn't realize it was a whole network of service providers that should, Washington State, for example, have something like a new soil health initiative, that there was this whole network of service providers have existed for several years that could help deliver it. And we felt like that was part of our problem of being a secret. So we wanted to start with some branding to brand the conservation districts of Washington State as a network of service providers. We just felt like branding could help us tell that story. So once, if they started seeing this logo of conservation districts of Washington State and seeing districts and our agency and our association, start presenting our work in a way that looked consistent and uniform, that they would say, oh, this is all connected. This is all one huge effort and a huge group of people who can help us deliver conservation effectively in our state. So that was why we started there. In terms of getting buy-in, I think, again, making sure, I can't say enough about having that representation on the CPO group of districts of different sizes and from different geographic areas. And they would go back to their districts, go back to the regions that they were from, and get feedback on pieces along the way. So as we were developing messaging, as we were developing a logo, as we were developing the color palette, individual members of the group would go to their boards, and we continue this today when we have new resources that we're working on. They'll bring them back to their boards or bring them back to their regions and be like, hey, I think this looks like a fly in our area, but what do you think? And then they'll bring that back to our committee, so that we are making sure that we're not going to put out anything that isn't going to work for anybody. And it might not work exactly as it's written, but we certainly don't want to put anybody off or feel like we're using language that's immediately going to turn somebody off. We want it to be as inclusive as possible. So that's been really helpful. I think just by having 12 to 15 districts on our communications committee that are part of the development process, they buy into it. Into these products, they start using it. Their neighboring districts see these 12 to 15 districts start using it, and it makes them interested. And I think the more that happens, we hear districts themselves being the spokespeople for the toolkit, for the branding, and that's way more powerful than me doing it, quite frankly, from the Conservation Commission as the state agency. It's not as effective when I say it. When fellow districts are telling each other that this is helpful, that this is useful, that goes a long way. So I think a big part of it is making sure that your committee members are bought in and committed to using it, what you're creating, and committed to telling, using some of the language from the messaging that we're working on, as long as they feel like their district and their region, with language that they could work with, and they're committed to it. I think it just sort of starts a trend when those members are using it and modeling it for other districts. I think those are some ways it's been, that I think we've gotten some buy-in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Well, like I said, before I really wrap this up, the first thing I really want to do is go back, and I really want to thank Laura. I want to thank you. First, this has been great stuff, but what I really appreciate is that you took the time not to just give us what you presented at NACD, but you sat in with us and you've listened to us a bit. And I think you've customized that. And I really appreciate you going that extra mile to help us. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
And then do that. And like I said, if you ever meet Laura, this is subdued Zoom Laura. And if you ever meet her in person, you'll see the other side. You'll see the other side. So I think that's a good thing. So probably we're going to wrap this part up. And so the next part we'll probably be doing in the education committee is we have to kind of say, all right, we've thrown all these ideas on the table and we still want to move forward to getting the word out about districts. But what are we going to do as a group differently than we have in the past? And how are we going to move this ball forward? So I would assume that will be coming up in our next meeting or two of the education committee. So thank you all for attending today.
Thank you, Laura. Hey, don't everybody leave. We've
Thank
still
you.
got some meeting stuff to talk about, I think, don't we, Alicia?
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. I'd be interested if we don't have time today, another day, and I guess we could do it ourselves individually, but I'd be interested in having her go to the website and show us some stuff off of the website. And yes, we do have other stuff to talk about.
Yeah, if you want me to take a couple minutes now, I can, or if you guys need your time to cover other things, I can do
okay.
that another time.
Chris, we don't have a quorum to do
Right.
some of the other things. So I don't know if now is a good time. I don't.
Let's
or
go
if
ahead
we
and do
wanna-
it.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Let me. Okay. You guys seeing our website now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, let me make sure this is a little bigger. This is the Conservation Commission's website. And so we have, this is our more public facing site, but we have a special area up here for conservation districts for them to find resources for them. So it's not just marketing here, but they'll find all their resources here. And on the left-hand side of the menu here, got all their different resources. And right here, it's alphabetical. You'll see the marketing toolkit. So this is where they'll go to find it in this whole tabbed area that I presented before. So everything in green here is linked. The color palette I showed you, these are different versions of the logo. One thing I didn't talk about, we had, and this was a really, I can't say enough about how helpful this exercise was. I talked about it a bit in the elevator pitch presentation I gave at NACD. We did a workshop where we came up with a positioning statement for conservation districts of Washington State. And that, what that is it's more of an internal agreement about what makes us unique and what our competitive advantage, what conservation districts' competitive advantage is to their audience. So like, you know, we have an extension office, we have the Nature Conservancy, we have land trusts, we have all these other organizations that do conservation work, we have other NGOs that do conservation work, and we wanted to come up with at least a statement that we could base all of our communications around, that defined what was it that made us really unique. And that was our first step before we got to our elevator pitch. And so at the bottom of this branding tab is what we came up with. And that's really where we landed on this idea of us being a community-based hub. You know, it's really something unique to districts. They are built by and for community, and they're this hub of information. And if the district doesn't have the specific thing you're looking for, they know who to connect you to. So we really liked the idea of being a community hub that brings people and resources together. So that was just, and again, in that exercise of coming up with this statement, we had you know, diversity of districts at the table to try to hash this out, from ones that serve very, very, very urban areas, including Seattle, to districts that serve, you know, counties that are enormous but have a total population that's, you know, less than most towns. And they're, you know, everything from orchardists to people who have dealt with wildfire. We had a real mix, and trying to come up with just some unifying agreement about what it is that makes us unique, that we could build our brand from. That was really helpful. Under media and events, I think I had on the screen a media checklist and a template. This is the event planning timeline. So just again, like this is one that's not at all, there's maybe a couple of things, like we have examples of different radio stations in Washington, but for the most part, this is not specific to Washington at all. Just some tips on when to invite the media, when to start promoting on social media, depending on how many weeks out you are from an event. So this is a great example when it's really not specific to Washington at all. So if it's helpful for others, yeah, welcome to use it. We have an appearance release form. So if you're doing a video or recording somebody in any way that provide a testimonial for you, we have suggested language for that. We have to have a disclaimer saying that it's not legal advice, but it is helpful and a good practice to have an appearance release form for your work. We have a template for a tour packet. This is in InDesign and Publisher. So that's one hurdle that we have had with creating templates, is that our districts have very different software that they use. Some of them have Adobe Creative products. Some of them have, Word or Office, maybe Publisher. So that's been a little bit of a challenge. But so for this tour packet and little tour insert, we have it in both InDesign and Publisher to help districts create those materials. I think, yeah, I can pull up the elevator pitch again here. Yeah, so here's the elevator pitch that I talked about earlier. And again, with this one, I mean, I think it covers like the main points that an elevator pitch should touch on, which really are these headings in the table here. But if Montana was going to do an elevator pitch, you would want it to be different than ours, but at least hopefully this could provide some prompts of what to cover in it and about how long it should be, and just kind of think about, what is the unique CD role? What is the unique CD purpose? How do you do your work that's really unique to the CD approach? So that might be helpful there. And then around outreach and engagement, oh gosh, we've got a lot. We've got some social media best practices and examples, and these are really designed because conservation districts are an arm of government. There's a few more things to consider with social media and around public records and things. So we've included some best practices to consider around that and some examples. We have some videos that we've recorded from some of our communication group meetings. So we're, like you're doing today, we've recorded some videos when some district folks have programs or examples that they want to share, so that we don't just share them with our internal group, but to make them available for all conservation districts who aren't part of our communications group. So we have one on conservation district and veteran partnerships, how to build, maintain, and track relationships, environmental education, a very specific Kids in the Creek education program. So that's a nice little collection of video presentations to help districts advance their outreach.
Hey, Laura, is where
Yeah.
you're at right now in the web page, is this just internal?
No, anybody who comes to our website, when you come to our website, you can either just get there directly from this web address, or you can navigate to it just by clicking the Conservation District resources. It's not password protected or internal at all. And then this last one, this tells a little bit more about our photo gallery. I can go into there in a second. We've got a collection of photography tips and tricks. Let's see. Oh, and then a digital icon library. So this relates to that conservation measures resource. that I mentioned. So we've got all these folders of different icons. So let's see, like resources and resource benefits, what's in here? So these are all, you know, got filtration, carbon sequestration, water droplets in blue, water droplets in white, water use, tree, and just kind of those icons that are going to relate most to our work. So you don't have to go searching for some that are that don't have any copyright issues with them. These are all copyright free that we've either created or just are copyright free. So there's collections of these free icons in here. And then that's how this visual equivalence resource works too. It'll link to some of those specific icons. So like if you want to talk about acres, acres restored or conserved in terms of football fields instead of acres, since people can visualize a football field more, there's a little icon of a football field you can use. Or it's another good one. Like if you wanted to use like that Palouse Conservation District's example where they would talk about number of dump trucks filled with soil line from here to there, we would use a little, we'd come up with a little icon of, you know, a space needle on one end, a capsule on the other with like these dump trucks on the way. And so you could just download this image to do that. And then our photo gallery, this just links to Flickr where our gallery is. And so underneath each of these, and this, I mean, our photo contest has been really awesome. Districts love participating in it. We get incredible pictures. This year we weren't able to offer any kind of prize or anything because of budget restrictions due to the pandemic. And we still got like, I think it was 150 entries. So yeah, they just love it. So we've been able to build this great gallery of photos thanks to that, and non-commercial use by our districts, our association, and district employees in our agency. They just come in here. Not every district is going to find that, you know, some of these photos won't work, like you were saying, Dave, for their region. Like this is clearly more like this is clearly more like an east side mountain recreation focused photo. These are more west side focused photos, but then right here is something more like shrub steppe. Okay, there's more eastern Washington. So I see districts use these photos on their materials a lot.
You know, I think one thing, Laura, that just came up, MACD tried to do a legislative brochure, and it's a really, it's good in basis, but one of the things when I looked at it is it just didn't seem to have representative photos. And Eric brought this up. He said, when he was trying to design this, he said, well, do you have a repository of photos? And so I don't think what we've had before, something like this, where you could go and then click and then find something, so that, yeah, you can't go down in Walla Walla and show them pictures of what's going on in Seattle.
Yeah. And that's been helpful. I mean, it took us a while to get to a point where we have photos from every single region, but I think I'm almost certain that we do now. And so that's been helpful for a lot of districts. The other thing that we've found, and this is just a really basic thing, is like, we have some pictures of, you know, like best management practices. This is like a fish screen being constructed. But it's these more like landscape photos and really striking fish and wildlife photos that when districts use it on their website, on their materials, on their social media, that's when people love it. And so sometimes just a really beautiful photo of your state and what it is that this is all about, you know, is enough to bring somebody in to learn. They might not know the first thing about you, but they like bluebirds. So that might be enough just to bring them in to read your post or learn a little bit more about you. So we found it really helpful just to have this collection of, even if it's not showing conservation in action per se, we have some of those, but having just images of just engaging pictures from our state has been really helpful in inviting people into our work. So I think that's a little more in-depth tour of our site here. And we're always adding more. So I think our latest thing that we want to do, we're working on we're calling it a conservation catalog, which is going to be a visual, both electronically and in print, visual catalog of some conservation actions. So it'll really be like BMPs, but we're trying to talk about BMPs in a way that actually makes them sound inviting and more accessible and not use as much technical language for an audience of folks that aren't at all familiar with conservation. Maybe they're new landowners. We have a lot more folks moving to Washington and buying farmland who have never farmed before. They're starting hobby farms, but they don't know anything about it. And so we want to have a resource that will help them recognize their property in the visuals that we present, and also encourage them to learn more about some things they might consider if they're going to have livestock on their property, if they have a riparian area on their property, and talk about it in language that they can relate to. So I think that'll be something we'll be putting out in the coming year as well. So every year we try to add something new. But yeah, everything in here, if it's helpful for districts in other areas, we love knowing that it's helpful. You're welcome to use it. It's always nice to hear if another state finds a way to make any of this work for them or even improve on what we have in here. We love knowing about that. So that's the only request we have, is if there's something that you make better or find a way to really use from this, we'd love to hear about it and see your examples. But yeah, there's no reason why, if there's something in here you want to use, just go for it. Is there anything else in here that you guys want to see more of, or is that what you were looking for?
Do you have anything on newsletters made easy or something like that? I don't know how common newsletters are amongst your various districts, but we here at Lewis and Clark spend quite a bit of time and money on a newsletter. I think it's quarterly. Is there a do's and don'ts you have on that, or any pointers?
That has come up before, and it's such a good question. We've talked about it, and then we never went down that road, partly because our districts all do it so differently. We were having a hard time knowing how to put out some good tips for that. We have some districts that aren't doing newsletters anymore, some that are doing it electronically, some who still do it through print. Yeah, I think we just haven't wrapped our mind around the best way to provide some good tips for that yet, because we're not sure how to serve most districts. I would say, I think the ways we've been hoping we can help with that, and like Palouse Conservation District, that newsletter I showed earlier, and we're hoping that some of the things that we put out in this will be helpful for their newsletters, like using icons to talk about what they've accomplished, and maybe using some photos from the gallery. But as far as, tips to make newsletters more efficient, effective, and putting them together, we have not. And if anybody else has, I would love to learn how to approach that.
Thank you.